You know what they say about first impressions. Actually, no, scratch that. Nobody really knows what they say because they are usually wrong about everything anyway. But if there's one thing the galaxy learned about humans, it's that we have a talent for making memorable entrances. And by memorable, I mean the type that makes entire star systems reconsider their life choices. It all started when Captain Rick Dalton. Yes, that's his actual name. And yes, his parents apparently had a sense of humor. Was piloting the cargo hauler Rusty Bucket through what he thought was empty space. The ship's name should have been the first clue that things weren't going to go smoothly. But Rick had always been an optimist. Well, that and he couldn't afford a better ship. Computer, run a diagnostic on the navigation system, Rick muttered, tapping the console with the universal human solution to all technical problems, percussive maintenance. Diagnostic complete. The ship's AI responded in a tone that somehow managed to sound both helpful and deeply concerned. Navigation system is functioning at 67% efficiency. However, stellar cartography data appears to be corrupted in sectors 12 through 47. 67% is practically perfect, Rick interrupted, because humans have this wonderful ability to redefine functional whenever it suits them. Plot a course for the Centauri trade station. What Rick didn't know, and what the galaxy's most sophisticated early warning systems had somehow failed to mention, was that he'd just wandered into the territorial space of the Zephyrian Galactic Empire. Not just any territorial space, mind you, but the sort of territorial space that comes with automatic death sentences for trespassers, and a bureaucracy so complex it makes Earth's tax code look like a children's picture book. The Zephyrians, you see, were what you might call aggressively organized. They had rules for their rules, and then they had rules about how to interpret those rules. They color-coded their filing systems by threat level and kept their plasma cannons sorted alphabetically. They were the type of species that would conquer a planet, and then immediately implement a standardized filing system for the conquest paperwork. Emperor Vexthul the Methodical. And yes, that was his actual title, because apparently even galactic tyrants need good branding. Was reviewing his daily reports when his communications officer, a nervous creature named Krill, approached with the expression that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. "Your Imperial Magnificence," Krill began, his 4 eyes darting around the throne room like he was expecting the ceiling to collapse. "We have detected an unauthorized vessel in Sector 7 Alpha Zulu 47. Emperor Vexthul didn't look up from his reports. After 3 centuries of ruling the galaxy's most uptight empire, he'd learned that 99% of urgent situations were just junior officers panicking about paperwork errors. Classification? Unknown, Your Magnificence. The vessel appears to be primitive." Now that got the Emperor's attention. He looked up with the expression that suggested Krill had just announced that gravity was optional. "Primitive? Krill, we conquered the last primitive species 50 years ago. Are you telling me we missed one?" "It appears so, Your Magnificence. The vessel is broadcasting on frequencies we haven't seen since the Great Cataloging of 2847. Their technology appears to be at least 4 centuries behind current galactic standard." Emperor Vexthul set down his reports with the careful precision of someone who just realized his day was about to become significantly more complicated. 4 centuries? Krill, are you certain? Because if there's a species out there that's managed to develop interstellar travel while somehow avoiding our expansion for 4 centuries, that suggests either remarkable stealth capabilities or incredible stupidity, Your Magnificence. I was going to say strategic patience, but your version works too. Meanwhile, Rick Dalton was having the time of his life, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just committed what the Zephyrian legal code classified as a Class A territorial violation with intent to exist unauthorized. He was humming along to an old Earth song, something about blue suede shoes, because humans will pack the strangest things for interstellar travel, when his proximity alarm started making the noise that suggested immediate attention was required. "Well, that can't be good," Rick observed with the casual understatement that would become legendary throughout the galaxy. He glanced at his sensors and noticed what appeared to be several dozen large, heavily armed spacecraft surrounding him in a formation that politely but firmly suggested he wasn't going anywhere. Rick's communication system crackled to life with what sounded like someone reading from a very official script. "Unknown vessel, you have violated Imperial space without authorization. Prepare to be boarded for processing and immediate execution. Please have all identification documents ready, and arrange your personal effects in order of sentimental value for efficient confiscation." Rick blinked. Then he blinked again because sometimes the universe says things that require a double take. Execution? That seems a bit harsh for a navigation error. He pressed the communication button because Rick had never met a potentially dangerous situation. He couldn't make worse with casual conversation. Hello there. This is Captain Rick Dalton aboard the cargo vessel Rusty Bucket. I think there might be some misunderstanding here. The reply came back immediately, as if whoever was speaking had been waiting their entire career for someone to suggest that Imperial regulations might contain a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding. You have committed unauthorized territorial violation. Preparation for execution will commence immediately upon boarding. Right, well, here's the thing, Rick said, settling back in his pilot's chair with the relaxed posture that suggested he was discussing weekend plans rather than his imminent demise. I'm not really prepared for execution today. I didn't dress for it. I haven't updated my will, and honestly, I've got a cargo delivery that's already running late. Could we maybe reschedule? There was a long pause, then another pause, then what sounded like muffled conversation, as if someone was covering their communication device and having a heated discussion with their colleagues. Did he just ask to reschedule his execution? Krill whispered to his fellow officers aboard the Imperial Dreadnought Methodical Compliance. I think he did, replied Commander Thex, a battle-hardened veteran who'd overseen the conquest of 17 star systems and thought he'd seen everything. In 30 years of Imperial service, no one has ever asked to reschedule their execution. What do we do? Commander Thex consulted his manual, because of course there was a manual for this sort of thing. He flipped through several sections, past immediate execution protocols and territorial violation responses, before realizing that nowhere in the Empire's comprehensive legal code was there a procedure for handling execution rescheduling requests. I'm not sure. There's no protocol for this. Back on the Rusty Bucket, Rick was examining his cargo manifest while he waited for a response. Because humans have this peculiar ability to multitask during potentially life-threatening situations. Computer, how's our fuel situation? Fuel reserves at 34%, Captain. Sufficient for reaching the Centauri trade station, provided we don't encounter any significant delays. Well, getting executed would definitely count as a significant delay, Rick mused. Let's try to avoid that. The communication system crackled again. Unknown vessel, please state your species and planet of origin for proper execution documentation. Rick Dalton, human, Earth. And before you ask, yes, that's spelled Human. We're relatively new to the whole interstellar travel thing. Another long pause. This one was followed by what sounded like someone frantically flipping through paperwork. Krill, Emperor Vexthul's voice came over the command frequency. Please tell me you've located human in our species database. I'm looking, Your Magnificence, but... Krill's voice had the tone of someone who was about to deliver news that would make everyone's day worse. There's no record of any species called human in our databases. No record of any planet called Earth either. That's impossible. We've cataloged every species in the galaxy. Every planet, every system, every significant asteroid. How can there be a species we've never heard of? Perhaps they're lying about their origin, Your Magnificence? Krill, look at their ship. Look at their technology. Does that seem like the vessel of a species sophisticated enough to create false identities that could fool our databases? Commander Thex's voice joined the conversation. Your Magnificence, if I may. The human seems remarkably unconcerned about his situation. Unconcerned? He's surrounded by the Imperial fleet and facing immediate execution. How can he be unconcerned? He asked if we could reschedule, Your Magnificence. Emperor Vexthul was quiet for so long that his officers began to wonder if the communication link had failed. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried the tone of someone who'd just realized that the universe was far weirder than he'd previously imagined. He asked to reschedule his execution. Yes, Your Magnificence. And he seemed casual about it. Extremely casual, Your Magnificence. He mentioned having a cargo delivery. A cargo delivery. The Emperor repeated the words as if he was trying to understand a foreign concept. He's more concerned about a cargo delivery than his imminent death. It would appear so, Your Magnificence. Emperor Vexthul had ruled the galaxy's most powerful empire for over 3 centuries. He'd conquered star systems, negotiated with beings of pure energy, and once spent an entire decade reorganizing the Imperial filing system for maximum efficiency. But never, in all his years of experience, had he encountered someone who prioritized package delivery over personal survival. Bring him aboard, he said finally. I want to meet this human. Chapter 2. First Contact Protocol, or How to Accidentally Intimidate an Empire. The Imperial Dreadnought. Methodical compliance was approximately the size of a small moon and had been designed by committee, which explained why it was both magnificently imposing and utterly impractical for anything except intimidation and filing paperwork. It had 47 different docking bays, each color-coded by security clearance, and a bureaucracy so complex that some junior officers had been known to get lost for weeks trying to find the correct form to request directions. Rick's little cargo hauler looked like a particularly shabby tugboat next to it, which was probably an insult to tugboats everywhere. As the docking clamps engaged with a series of mechanical thuds that sounded expensive, Rick was making a mental note to request hazard pay for this delivery, assuming he survived long enough to file the paperwork. "Computer, lock down all systems and engage security protocols," Rick instructed, because even though he was about to board an alien warship, he wasn't born yesterday. "Security protocols engaged, Captain. Although I should point out that given our current navigation system reliability issues, their technology could likely access our systems regardless of our security measures." "Thank you for that confidence boost," Rick muttered, checking his sidearm out of habit. Not that a human plasma pistol would do much against an Imperial dreadnought, but sometimes it's the principle of the thing. The airlock cycled open with a hiss that somehow managed to sound official, revealing a boarding party of 6 Zephyrian soldiers in full ceremonial armor. They looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a professional wrestler, and then given the result access to a very impressive armory. The lead soldier stepped forward, his armor clanking with the authority that suggested he'd practiced this entrance. "Human Rick Dalton, you will accompany us to the Imperial Audience Chamber for processing and execution. Please move in an orderly fashion and refrain from any sudden movements, loud noises, or attempts at humor." Rick raised an eyebrow. "Attempts at humor? Is that standard procedure, or have you guys had problems with that before?" The soldier's helmet tilted slightly, which might have been confusion or might have been the Zephyrian equivalent of a sigh. The humor prohibition was added to the regulations after an incident with the Corvians. What happened with the Corvians? They made so many jokes during their execution ceremony that half the Imperial Guard died of laughter. Literally. "It's a medical condition for our species. Excessive humor can cause fatal respiratory failure." Rick paused, processing this information with the careful consideration that probably should have happened before he'd agreed to board an alien warship. "So when you say refrain from attempts at humor, you mean..." "We mean that if you make us laugh too hard, we'll die. And then Command will have to explain to the Emperor why his execution squad died of comedy, which would reflect poorly on all our efficiency ratings." "Right, no jokes, got it." Rick stepped into the corridor, which was lit by what appeared to be the galactic standard for intimidating blue light. "Quick question, though. What constitutes humor in your culture? Because I want to make sure I don't accidentally say something funny." The soldier considered this. "Generally speaking, unexpected juxtapositions, social commentary, and observations about the absurdity of bureaucratic procedures. Also, anything involving the phrase, 'that's what she said.' You guys know about 'that's what she said' jokes?" "The Corvians introduced us to the concept. Command issued a galaxy-wide memo about it." Rick nodded thoughtfully. "So basically, I should avoid making observations about how this whole situation is rather ridiculous?" "That would be advisable." They walked in silence for a few minutes, passing through corridors that looked like someone had designed a filing cabinet the size of a city. Everything was labeled, organized, and color-coded to within an inch of its life. Even the emergency exits had subcategories. "Can I ask you something?" Rick said finally, because humans are constitutionally incapable of comfortable silence in awkward situations, within reason. "Is this whole immediate execution for territorial violations thing really necessary? I mean, it seems like an extreme reaction to what was essentially a GPS error." The soldier's pace didn't change, but his helmet turned slightly toward Rick. "The Imperial Legal Code is very clear on territorial violations. Unauthorized presence in Imperial space constitutes a threat to galactic stability, and must be addressed with immediate and decisive action. But I'm just one guy in a cargo hauler. I'm not exactly a threat to galactic stability. The regulations don't account for scale of threat, only the legal classification of the violation." "That seems inefficient." The soldier stopped walking. The other 5 soldiers stopped walking. Rick got the distinct impression that he'd just said something significant, though he wasn't sure what. "Inefficient?" the lead soldier repeated. "Well, yeah. I mean, you've got this massive fleet, all these resources, all this manpower, and you're using it to execute one confused cargo pilot. From an organizational standpoint, that's a pretty significant resource allocation error." The soldiers exchanged glances that somehow managed to be visible even through their helmets. In the Zephyrian Empire, efficiency was more than just a goal. It was a core cultural value. Suggesting that Imperial procedures were inefficient was like suggesting that gravity was optional, technically possible, but likely to cause severe philosophical distress. "You believe," the lead soldier said carefully, "that our execution protocols represent an inefficient use of Imperial resources." "I'm not trying to criticize your system," Rick said quickly, because he was starting to realize that this conversation was heading in a dangerous direction. "I'm just saying that maybe there's a more cost-effective way to handle minor territorial violations, like a fine, or a warning, or maybe just asking people to leave." "A fine, sure. You know, a financial penalty proportional to the severity of the infraction. It's a pretty standard approach to minor legal violations. And you believe this would be more efficient than execution?" Rick considered this. "Well, execution is pretty permanent, which means you don't get repeat customers. From a long-term perspective, that's leaving money on the table." The soldiers were now having what appeared to be an intense silent conversation via helmet comm systems. Rick couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see the animated gesturing that suggested someone was about to make a phone call to their supervisor. "Human Rick Dalton," the lead soldier said finally. "We are going to accelerate your meeting with the Emperor. Is that good or bad? We're not sure yet." Chapter 3. An Audience with Efficiency. The Imperial throne room was exactly what you'd expect from a galactic empire with control issues. Massive, intimidating, and organized with the precision that suggested someone had used a ruler to measure the distance between decorative elements. The ceiling was so high it had its own weather patterns, and the throne itself looked like someone had tried to build a chair out of pure bureaucratic authority. Emperor Vex Thul the Methodical sat on said throne, reviewing a tablet that probably contained more legal text than most planets' entire judicial systems. He was tall, even for a Zephyrian, with the bearing that suggested he'd never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with proper documentation. His ceremonial robes were precisely arranged, his crown was positioned at exactly the regulation angle, and his expression suggested he was about to conduct a very important business meeting that might end with someone getting executed. Rick entered the throne room flanked by his escort, looking around with the casual interest that most tourists display in museums. "Wow, this is impressive. Did you guys hire a decorator, or is this all Imperial standard?" Emperor Vex Thul looked up from his tablet with the expression of someone who'd just heard a very interesting sound coming from their spaceship's engine. "You are the human. Rick Dalton, cargo hauler, at your service." Rick gave a slight bow that was probably meant to be respectful, but looked more like someone acknowledging a moderately interesting piece of architecture. "Thanks for not executing me immediately, by the way. I appreciate the consideration." The Emperor set down his tablet with careful precision. "My soldiers inform me that you have observations about Imperial efficiency protocols." "Oh, that. Well, they asked, so I answered. I hope I didn't overstep any boundaries there. You suggested that our territorial violation response procedures represent an inefficient allocation of resources." Rick shifted slightly, suddenly aware that he might have wandered into sensitive territory. "Look, I'm not trying to tell you how to run your empire. It's clearly working for you. This place is incredible. Your ships are amazing, and your organization is frankly intimidating in its thoroughness. I'm just saying that maybe there are some edge cases where a more flexible approach might yield better results." Edge cases. Yeah, you know, unusual situations that don't quite fit the standard procedures. Like when someone accidentally wanders into your territory because their navigation system has corrupted stellar cartography data. Emperor Vex Thul leaned forward slightly. "You are suggesting that your presence here was accidental." "Completely accidental. I was trying to reach the Centauri trade station, but my nav system has been giving me trouble. The diagnostic shows 67% efficiency, which sounds reasonable until you realize that the remaining 33% includes the part that keeps you from wandering into galactic empires." "What cargo?" Rick brightened, because this was a topic he could discuss without accidentally critiquing galactic legal systems. "Medical supplies for the Centauri colony. Nothing exotic. Antibiotics, surgical instruments, some diagnostic equipment. The sort of stuff you need when you're setting up a new settlement and don't want half your population dying of easily preventable diseases." The Emperor was quiet for a moment. "You are transporting medical supplies to a colonial settlement." "That's right. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and helps people. Plus, the Centauri folks are usually pretty reasonable about delivery schedules, which is more than I can say for some clients. And your navigation malfunction caused you to enter Imperial space while attempting to complete this delivery." "Exactly. Which is why I asked about rescheduling. I mean, I understand that you've got procedures and everything, but these medical supplies are time-sensitive. People need them." Emperor Vex Thul stood up from his throne, which was apparently significant enough that every guard in the room snapped to attention. "Human Rick Dalton, in 3 centuries of Imperial rule, you are the first being to enter our territory accidentally. request to reschedule their execution, critique our resource allocation, and prioritize the completion of a humanitarian mission over their own survival. Rick wasn't sure if this was good news or very bad news. Is that unusual? It's unprecedented. The Emperor began pacing, which seemed to be his way of thinking out loud. Most species that encounter the Empire either attempt to fight us, flee from us, or negotiate with us. You have done none of these things. Well, fighting you seems like a bad idea. Fleeing is rather difficult when you're surrounded, and I'm not sure what I'd have to negotiate with. Instead, you have questioned our efficiency, expressed concern for your delivery schedule, and treated the situation as if it were a minor bureaucratic inconvenience. Rick considered this. I mean, when you put it like that, it does sound pretty weird. Weird. The Emperor repeated the word as if he was trying to understand a foreign concept. Yes, I suppose it is weird. Tell me, human Rick Dalton, what is your understanding of the Zephyrian Empire? Honestly, before today I'd never heard of you guys, which is embarrassing considering how impressive your operation is. You've obviously got a significant military presence, sophisticated technology, and what appears to be very effective administrative systems. How long have you been running things around here? The Emperor stopped pacing. You've never heard of the Zephyrian Empire? Nope. Sorry about that. We control 73 star systems, maintain a standing fleet of over 10,000 vessels, and have been the dominant galactic power for the past 4 centuries. 4 centuries? Wow, that's actually really impressive. You guys have been busy. Rick paused, although it does explain why I haven't heard of you. Earth's only been doing interstellar travel for about 60 years now, and we're fairly focused on our local neighborhood. We probably wouldn't have run into you guys for another few decades if my navigation system hadn't decided to get creative. The throne room was absolutely silent. Emperor Vexthul stared at Rick with an expression that suggested he'd just been told that mathematics was optional. His guards were motionless, probably because no one had ever trained them for a situation where someone casually mentioned that their species had been doing interstellar travel for only 60 years. 60 years, the Emperor said finally. Give or take. The first successful FTL drive was tested in 2387, but it took us another decade to work out the bugs. Even now, our tech is pretty basic compared to what you guys are running, hence the navigation problems. And in 60 years of interstellar travel, your species has never encountered the Zephyrian Empire. Not that I'm aware of. Although to be fair, space is really big, and we've mostly been sticking to the local systems. Earth, Alpha Centauri, Wolf 359, that general area. We're still figuring out the whole galactic civilization thing. Emperor Vexthul sat back down on his throne with the careful movements of someone who just realized that their entire worldview might need some adjustment. Commander Thex. Yes, Your Magnificence? Please have our xenobiology department run a full analysis on the human. I want to know everything about their species, their technology, their civilization, and most importantly, how they managed to develop interstellar travel without our knowledge. At once, Your Magnificence. Rick raised his hand slightly. If it's okay with you, could we maybe speed this along a bit? I really do need to get those medical supplies to Centauri, and if I'm much later, people are going to worry. The Emperor looked at him for a long moment. You are surrounded by the Imperial fleet, facing potential execution, under investigation by our xenobiology department, and your primary concern is still your delivery schedule. Well, yeah. I mean, this is all very interesting, and you seem like reasonable people once you get past the whole immediate execution thing, but I've got responsibilities. The Centauri colony is counting on those supplies. What if I were to order the Imperial fleet to escort you to Centauri? Rick blinked. That seems like overkill, but I appreciate the thought. Are you sure you can spare the ships? Human Rick Dalton, Emperor Vexthul said, and for the first time since Rick had been brought aboard, the Emperor was almost smiling. I think we need to have a longer conversation. Chapter 4. Cultural Exchange Program, or How Humans Broke an Empire by Being Reasonable. The Imperial Conference Room was designed for efficiency, which meant it was about as comfortable as a tax audit and twice as intimidating. The table was regulation size, the chairs were regulation height, and even the water glasses were positioned at precisely measured intervals. It was the sort of room where important decisions were made by people who had strong opinions about font choices. Rick sat at one end of the table with a cup of what the Zephyrians called clev, and what tasted like someone had tried to make coffee using industrial solvent and good intentions. Emperor Vexthul sat at the other end, flanked by advisors who looked like they'd spent their careers preparing for this exact conversation, but weren't quite sure what this conversation actually was. "So," Rick said, setting down his cup with the careful politeness that suggested he was trying not to offend his host's beverage choices. "What did your xenobiology people find?" "According to their preliminary analysis," the Emperor replied, consulting a tablet thick enough to serve as improvised body armor, "humans are a bipedal carbon-based species with a remarkable capacity for problem-solving, adaptation, and what our psychologists describe as inappropriate optimism in the face of overwhelming odds." "That sounds about right." They also noted an unusual tendency toward what they call constructive criticism of authority structures and casual disregard for hierarchical protocol. Rick considered this. "We prefer to think of it as being helpful and treating people like people." "Yes, they mentioned that too." The Emperor scrolled through more data. "Your species appears to have developed interstellar travel through what our engineers describe as an alarming combination of theoretical brilliance and practical stubbornness. Your technology is approximately 4 centuries behind galactic standard, but you've somehow managed to make it work through what appears to be pure determination." "We're good at making things work," Rick agreed. "It's our specialty." They also noted that your ship's design violates approximately 47 different engineering principles, operates on technology that should be impossible and yet functions reliably enough for interstellar cargo transport. The Rusty Bucket is a good ship. She's not pretty and she's not fast, but she gets the job done. Emperor Vexthal set down his tablet and looked directly at Rick. "Human Rick Dalton, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." "Sure. Are you representatives of an advanced civilization that's pretending to be primitive in order to infiltrate our empire?" Rick nearly choked on his clev. "What? No. Why would you think that?" "Because in 4 centuries of galactic expansion, we have never encountered a species that responds to overwhelming military force with casual conversation and helpful suggestions for improving our efficiency." "Oh, well, that's just how we handle stressful situations. Panic doesn't really solve anything, so we try to stay calm and work through the problem." "You consider facing execution by a galactic empire to be a stressful situation?" "I mean, it's not ideal, but it's not the most frustrating thing that's happened to me recently." The Emperor exchanged glances with his advisors, who were frantically taking notes on everything Rick said. "What would you consider more frustrating than the threat of execution?" "Well, last month my cargo hauler license renewal got rejected because of a clerical error, and it took weeks to sort out. That was way more aggravating than this." "A bureaucratic error was more concerning to you than the threat of death." "Well, yeah. I mean, you can negotiate with people who are trying to kill you. You can't negotiate with a computer system that's convinced your paperwork is filed under the wrong category." The silence that followed this statement was so profound that Rick started to wonder if he'd accidentally said something offensive. The Emperor and his advisors were staring at him with expressions that suggested he'd just solved a mathematical proof that had been puzzling them for centuries. "You can negotiate with people who are trying to kill you," the Emperor repeated slowly. "Sure. People usually have reasons for their actions, even if those reasons seem extreme. Once you understand what they want, you can usually find some middle ground. And you believe this approach would work with the Zephyrian Empire?" "Well, it seems to be working so far. I mean, we're having a conversation instead of the alternative." Emperor Vexthul leaned back in his chair, which was probably the most relaxed anyone had seen him in decades. "Human Rick Dalton, I think I'm beginning to understand why your species has managed to survive 60 years of interstellar travel, despite having technology that shouldn't work and no apparent awareness of galactic politics. Is that good or bad?" "I'm not sure yet. Tell me, what is your species' approach to conflict resolution?" Rick thought about this. "Generally speaking, we try to figure out what everyone wants, and then find a solution that works for as many people as possible. It doesn't always work, but it's usually worth trying before you resort to more dramatic options. And if negotiation fails, then we adapt. Humans are really good at adapting to new situations, even when those situations are completely ridiculous situations. Like accidentally wandering into a galactic empire and having to explain to the Emperor why your delivery schedule is more important than avoiding execution." The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. "Human Rick Dalton, I have a proposition for you." "I'm listening." "The Zephyrian Empire has been operating under the same basic protocols for 4 centuries. We expand, we conquer, we organize, we file the appropriate paperwork. It's been highly effective. It certainly seems effective. However, Recent analysis suggests that our expansion has reached a point of diminishing returns. We control most of the useful territory in this region of the galaxy, and further expansion would require significant resource investment for marginal strategic benefit. Rick nodded. So you're looking at optimization rather than growth? Exactly. But our entire governmental structure is designed around expansion and conquest. We don't have established protocols for maintenance. You're good at taking over things, but you're not sure how to run them long term. That's a somewhat simplified analysis, but yes. Rick leaned forward. What sort of problems are you having? The Emperor consulted his tablet again. Administrative inefficiencies, resource allocation errors, communication delays between distant systems, and what our analysts describe as chronic bureaucratic bloat. Have you considered decentralization? Decentralization? You know, giving more authority to local administrators instead of trying to run everything from the central government. It reduces communication delays and allows for more flexible responses to regional problems. The advisors were now typing furiously on their own tablets, recording every word of this conversation. One of them looked up with the expression of someone who just had a religious revelation. Your Magnificence, the human is describing a distributed administrative model. I gathered that, Advisor Keth. Your Magnificence, we've been modeling distributed administrative systems for over a decade, but we could never resolve the authority structure problems. Rick looked interested. What sort of authority structure problems? How do you maintain centralized control while allowing local autonomy? How do you prevent regional administrators from becoming independent power centers? How do you ensure consistent policy implementation across multiple systems? Well, Rick said, settling back in his chair. That depends on what you're optimizing for. Do you want maximum control, maximum efficiency, or maximum stability? Is it possible to achieve all three? Not simultaneously, no. You have to prioritize, but you can usually find a balance that works. Emperor Vex Thol set down his tablet and looked at Rick with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and disbelief. You are suggesting that we restructure the administrative framework of a galactic empire, as if it were a management consulting problem. Well, when you get down to it, that's exactly what it is. You've got resource allocation issues, communication problems, and efficiency concerns. The scale is bigger than most management problems, but the underlying principles are the same. And you believe human administrative principles would be applicable to galactic governance. Some of them, probably. I mean, people are people, regardless of species. They want to feel like their work matters. They want clear expectations, and they want to know that someone's listening when they have problems. The Emperor was quiet for so long that Rick started to wonder if the conversation was over. Finally he spoke, and his voice carried a tone that suggested he was about to make a decision that would have significant consequences. Human Rick Dalton, how would you like to become the first human ambassador to the Zephyrian Empire? Rick blinked. I'm flattered, but I'm really just a cargo hauler. I don't know anything about diplomacy. You have successfully negotiated your way out of execution, critiqued our administrative efficiency, and proposed solutions to governmental problems that our best analysts have been struggling with for years. If that's not diplomacy, I'm not sure what is. But what about my cargo run? We'll escort you to Centauri to complete your delivery. Then, if you're willing, we'd like you to return here and help us develop a more efficient approach to galactic governance. Rick thought about this. Would I still be able to do cargo runs? If you want to, yes. And you're not going to execute me? I think we've established that execution would be a significant waste of resources. Rick grinned. In that case, I'd be happy to help. Chapter 5. The Centauri Delivery, or How to Accidentally Start a Revolution. The Imperial escort to Centauri consisted of 12 dreadnoughts, 47 cruisers, and enough firepower to level a small planet. It was the type of military procession that normally preceded the conquest of entire star systems, but in this case, it was just making sure one human could deliver his medical supplies on time. Rick piloted the rusty bucket in the center of the formation, trying not to think about how much this escort was costing the Empire per hour. The methodical compliance flanked him to starboard, close enough that he could see Emperor Vexus Thul on the bridge through the massive observation windows. This is probably overkill, Rick muttered to his ship's computer. I concur, Captain. Although I must admit it's refreshing to travel with ships that maintain proper navigation systems and structural integrity protocols. Hey, we've never had a catastrophic failure. We've never had a catastrophic failure yet, Captain. There's an important statistical distinction. Rick's communication system chimed with an incoming message from the Imperial flagship. Human Rick Dalton, we are approaching the Centauri system. Please transmit your delivery authorization codes. Roger that, Rick replied, uploading the cargo manifest and delivery permits. Centauri Control, this is cargo hauler Rusty Bucket requesting approach clearance for medical supply delivery. The response came back immediately, but it carried a tone that suggested the traffic controller had just noticed something unusual on their sensors. Rusty Bucket, we show you approaching with what appears to be a significant military escort. Please confirm your status. Rick glanced at the Imperial formation surrounding him. Yeah, about that. It's a long story. I'm still just delivering medical supplies, but I've picked up some friends along the way. Friends? Representatives of the Zephyrian Empire. They're providing escort services. There was a long pause. The Zephyrian Empire? Rick, we've never heard of the Zephyrian Empire. I hadn't either until this morning. Apparently they control most of the galaxy. Most of the galaxy? 73 star systems, according to the Emperor. The Emperor is escorting your medical supply delivery? Rick looked over at the methodical compliance, where he could see Emperor Vexthal apparently reviewing reports on a tablet. He's a very hands-on administrator. Another pause. Rick, are you being held hostage? No, nothing like that. Actually, they're being quite helpful. The Emperor offered me a job. What sort of job? Ambassador. Apparently I'm good at diplomacy. The silence that followed was so long that Rick started to wonder if the communication link had failed. Finally, the Centauri traffic controller spoke, and his voice carried the tone of someone who just realized their day was about to become significantly more complicated. Rusty Bucket, you are cleared for approach to Docking Bay 7. Please ask your escort to maintain a safe distance from the station. Will do, and don't worry, they're friendly. Rick guided the Rusty Bucket toward the Centauri station, while the Imperial fleet arranged itself in what was probably meant to be a non-threatening formation, but looked more like the galaxy's most polite invasion force. The station itself was a modest affair, a collection of habitation modules, industrial facilities, and docking bays that had been assembled with more practical considerations than aesthetic ones. As Rick docked and began unloading his cargo, a crowd had gathered in the docking bay. Word had apparently spread that someone had arrived with a Galactic Empire in tow, and the colonists were curious about their visitors. Dr. Lisa Ward, the colony's chief medical officer, approached as Rick was supervising the cargo transfer. Rick, what exactly is going on here? Standard medical supply delivery, Rick replied, checking items off his manifest. Although I did run into some complications along the way. Complications involving a Galactic Empire? That's the short version, yeah. Dr. Ward looked through the docking bay windows at the Imperial fleet. Rick, that's the largest military force I've ever seen. Are we in some danger? Not at all. Actually, they're pretty reasonable once you get past the initial execution threats. Execution threats? It's a cultural thing. They're very big on proper procedure. Before Dr. Ward could respond, the docking bay's main entrance opened to admit a delegation of Zephyrian officers led by Commander Thex. They moved with the precision that suggested they'd practiced this entrance, but their expressions suggested they weren't quite sure what they were supposed to do next. Greetings, Commander Thex announced to the assembled colonists. I am Commander Thex of the Imperial Fleet. We come in? Peace? The last word came out as more of a question, as if the commander wasn't entirely certain about the protocol for peaceful encounters. Rick stepped forward. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Commander Thex and the crew of the Methodical Compliance. They're representatives of the Zephyrian Empire, and they've been kind enough to escort me here. Dr. Ward extended her hand toward Commander Thex. Welcome to Centauri Station. I'm Dr. Lisa Ward, Chief Medical Officer. Commander Thex stared at the offered hand for a moment, clearly unsure what to do with it. Is this a human greeting ritual? It's called a handshake, Rick explained. It's how we say hello. Commander Thex carefully extended one of his armored hands and gently grasped Dr. Ward's. Handshake, he repeated, as if memorizing the term. This is acceptable. Dr. Ward smiled. Very acceptable. Thank you for escorting Rick safely to our station. It was our pleasure, Commander Thex replied, and Rick could hear the slight surprise in his voice, as if the commander had just realized that it actually had been pleasant. Over the next hour, something remarkable happened. The Zephyrian officers, who had presumably spent their careers conquering star systems and filing the appropriate paperwork, found themselves having casual conversations with Centauri colonists about everything from terraforming techniques to the challenges of deep space agriculture. Rick watched from across the docking bay as Commander Thex listened intently while Dr. Ward explained the medical challenges of establishing a colony in a system with 3 suns and variable solar radiation. The commander was taking notes. Human Rick Dalton. Rick turned to find Emperor Vexthul approaching, flanked by 2 guards who looked more ceremonial than practical. Your Magnificence, how are you finding the station? Fascinating, the Emperor replied. I've spent 3 centuries conquering civilizations, but I've never actually taken the time to observe how they function at the individual level. What do you think? The Emperor paused, considering his words carefully. These colonists are remarkably efficient. They've established a functioning settlement with minimal resources, developed solutions to complex environmental challenges, and maintain high morale despite significant hardships. That's humans for you. We're good at making things work. Yes, I'm beginning to understand that. The Emperor watched as one of his officers helped a group of colonists move a piece of heavy equipment. My officers are enjoying this interaction. Are you surprised? Extremely. In 4 centuries of Imperial service, I have never seen Zephyrian military personnel voluntarily engage in civilian assistance activities. Rick nodded toward Commander Thex, who was now examining a hydroponic farming setup with the intense interest usually reserved for military technology. People like feeling useful, regardless of species. Your officers are good at solving problems. They just usually solve them with conquest instead of cooperation. And you believe cooperation is more effective than conquest? For some problems, yeah. You can't conquer your way to better agricultural yields or more efficient medical distribution. Emperor Vexthul was quiet for a moment. Human Rick Dalton, I think I'm beginning to understand why my empire may need to reconsider its approach to galactic relations. Change is hard, Rick agreed, but it's usually worth it. Tell me, if you were to redesign the Zephyrian Empire's relationship with other civilizations, how would you approach it? Rick thought about this while watching his new friends work together to solve practical problems. Well, instead of showing up with fleets and demanding surrender, you could try showing up with resources and offering to help. Help with what? Whatever they need. Medical supplies, engineering expertise, agricultural technology, infrastructure development. You've got the resources of 73 star systems. Imagine what you could accomplish if you used them to build things instead of just conquering them. The Emperor followed Rick's gaze to where Zephyrian officers and human colonists were collaborating on what appeared to be an improvement to the station's power distribution system. A galactic empire based on mutual assistance rather than territorial control. It's just an idea. It's a revolutionary idea, Human Rick Dalton, and I think it might actually work. Chapter 6. The Bureaucratic Revolution, or How Humans Taught an Empire to Chill Out. 3 weeks later, Rick found himself in the strangest situation of his life. Sitting in the Imperial Palace's newly established Efficiency Advisory Committee meeting, drinking surprisingly decent coffee, a beverage the Zephyrians had apparently never encountered but immediately recognized as superior to Clev, and watching a galactic empire try to reinvent itself. The conference room had been redesigned since his last visit. Gone were the intimidating formal arrangements and regulation spacing. Instead, there were comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, whiteboards covered with diagrams and flowcharts, and what appeared to be a coffee station that had been installed with the precision usually reserved for military fortifications. Status report on the Voluntary Assistance Pilot Program, Emperor Vexthul announced, consulting his tablet with the same intensity he'd once reserved for conquest planning. Advisor Keth stood up, holding a tablet thick enough to serve as a weapon. Preliminary results are unprecedented, Your Magnificence. Define unprecedented. We have received 847 requests for assistance from previously unconquered civilizations, 23 applications for voluntary membership in the Empire, and 156 inquiries about our new cooperative development initiatives. Rick nearly choked on his coffee. 847 requests for help? The word appears to have spread rapidly through the galactic communication networks, Advisor Keth explained. Apparently, the concept of a military power offering assistance rather than conquest is considered newsworthy. Emperor Vexthul set down his tablet and looked directly at Rick. Human Rick Dalton, in 3 weeks. Your suggestions have generated more positive diplomatic contact than we achieved in the previous century through traditional conquest methods. That's, wow. I wasn't expecting it to scale up that quickly. Neither were we. Which brings us to our current problem. What sort of problem? We don't have enough ships. Rick blinked. You don't have enough ships? You guys have the largest fleet in the galaxy. For conquest operations, yes. but conquest fleets are optimized for intimidation and military action. Assistance operations require completely different resources: cargo capacity, specialized equipment, personnel trained in cooperative rather than military operations. Advisor Keth pulled up a holographic display showing fleet deployment charts. We've had to retrofit 40% of our military vessels for cargo transport and civilian assistance operations. Our dreadnoughts are currently delivering agricultural equipment to farming colonies. Is that working? Surprisingly well, actually. The crews report higher morale than we've seen in decades. Rick studied the deployment charts. Why higher morale? According to preliminary psychological evaluations, another advisor chimed in. Military personnel derive significant satisfaction from constructive problem-solving activities. Apparently, helping civilizations solve infrastructure problems is more rewarding than conquering them. Emperor Vexthul nodded. Our officers are discovering that there are more interesting challenges in cooperation than in conquest. Makes sense, Rick said. Conquest is basically the same process every time. Show up, demand surrender, file paperwork. Cooperation is different every time because every civilization has different problems. Exactly, which brings us to our next issue. Another problem? We're running out of bureaucrats. Rick paused, trying to process this statement. I'm sorry, what? The Zephyrian Empire has always operated on the principle that proper documentation is essential for efficient governance. We have maintained extensive bureaucratic structures to manage conquest, territorial administration, and resource allocation. Right. However, cooperative assistance operations generate completely different types of paperwork. Instead of conquest reports and territorial documentation, we need project planning documents, resource sharing agreements, and collaborative outcome assessments. Advisor Keth nodded enthusiastically. The paperwork requirements for helping someone improve their agricultural yields are completely different from the paperwork requirements for conquering their planet. And much more complex, added another advisor. Conquest is a binary outcome. Either you succeed or you fail. Cooperation involves ongoing relationships, progress measurements, and continuous optimization. Rick looked around the room at the assembled advisors, all of whom appeared to be somewhere between excited and overwhelmed. So you're saying that being helpful requires more paperwork than being terrifying? Significantly more paperwork, Emperor Vexthul confirmed. We've had to expand our administrative departments by 300% just to handle the documentation for our pilot programs. But the results are worth it? The efficiency gains are remarkable. Cooperative civilizations are 400% more productive than conquered territories. Resource-sharing agreements reduce waste by 60%, and our administrative costs are actually decreasing despite the increased paperwork complexity. Rick sipped his coffee and tried to wrap his head around the idea that he'd accidentally helped a galactic empire become more efficient by making it more complicated. So what's the solution? We need more people who understand cooperative administrative principles, the Emperor said. And based on our experience with humans, we believe your species might be uniquely qualified to help us develop these capabilities. You want more humans to help run your empire? We want to establish a formal partnership between the Zephyrian Empire and Earth. Cultural exchange, technological cooperation, administrative consultation, a comprehensive alliance based on mutual benefit rather than conquest. Rick set down his coffee cup with the careful precision that suggested he was buying time to think. That's a pretty big decision. I mean, I'm just one guy. I can't speak for all of humanity. We understand that. Which is why we would like you to return to Earth as our official ambassador and present our proposal to your government. What sort of proposal? Emperor Vexthul stood up and activated a holographic display that showed what appeared to be a comprehensive interstellar development plan. The Zephyrian Human Cooperative Development Initiative, a partnership program designed to apply human organizational principles and Zephyrian resources to address infrastructure, medical, and technological needs throughout the galaxy. Rick studied the display, which looked like someone had taken a management consulting presentation and scaled it up to cover multiple star systems. This is incredibly ambitious. It's also incredibly necessary. Our analysis suggests that cooperative development is not only more effective than conquest, it's the only sustainable approach to long-term galactic stability. And you think humans are the key to making this work? Human Rick Dalton, the Emperor said with something that might have been a smile. In 60 years of interstellar travel, your species has managed to establish peaceful relationships with every civilization you've encountered, develop innovative solutions to complex technical problems, and maintain stable governmental systems, despite having no central authority. We don't have central authority because we can't agree on anything. Exactly. You've learned to achieve cooperation without conquest, stability without domination, and efficiency without authoritarianism. These are the principles the galaxy needs. Rick looked around the room at the assembled Zephyrian advisors, all of whom were watching him with expressions of hopeful expectation. If I do this, if I go back to Earth and present your proposal, what happens if they say no? Then we continue developing our cooperative approaches with other species and hope that humanity will eventually choose to join us. And if they say yes, then we begin the most ambitious interstellar development project in galactic history. Rick was quiet for a moment, considering the implications of what he was being asked to do. Can I ask you something, Your Magnificence? Of course. What changed your mind? I mean, 3 weeks ago you were ready to execute me for a territorial violation. Now you're talking about reshaping galactic civilization. That's a pretty significant philosophical shift. Emperor Vex Thul sat back down and looked directly at Rick. 3 weeks ago, I believed that order could only be maintained through control, that efficiency required hierarchy, and that stability demanded conquest. You showed me that there are other approaches that are not only more effective but more satisfying for everyone involved. It wasn't just me. Your people were ready for this change. I just gave them permission to try something different. Perhaps. But without your example, we never would have discovered that our officers prefer cooperation to conquest, that our administrative systems work better when they're helping rather than controlling, and that the galaxy is full of civilizations that would rather work with us than fight us. Rick grinned. So I accidentally started a revolution by being reasonable. The most effective revolution in galactic history, the Emperor agreed. And we'd like your help to finish it. Chapter 7. The Pitch, or How to Sell Galactic Peace to Earth's Most Skeptical Committee. The United Earth Council chambers looked exactly like what you'd expect from a governmental body that had been designed by committee. Efficiently bland, carefully neutral, and optimized for making important decisions feel as boring as possible. The council members sat in precisely arranged seats behind a curved desk that had probably been chosen for its ability to make everyone look equally important and equally skeptical. Rick sat at a small table in the center of the room, trying not to think about the fact that he was about to present the most important diplomatic proposal in human history to a group of people who looked like they'd rather be reviewing tax legislation. Behind him, displayed on the chamber's main screen, was a presentation that had taken him and the Zephyrian Advisory Committee 3 days to prepare and probably violated several principles of effective public speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, Rick began, 3 weeks ago, I was a cargo hauler trying to deliver medical supplies to Centauri. Today, I'm here to tell you that we've accidentally made contact with a galactic empire, and they want to be friends. Council Chairman Williams, a man who had perfected the art of looking skeptical, leaned forward. Mr. Dalton, our preliminary reports suggest that this Zephyrian empire controls 73 star systems and maintains a military force capable of conquering entire planets. Please explain why we should consider them friendly. Well, sir, they haven't conquered us. Is that your primary evidence of their peaceful intentions? Rick clicked to the next slide of his presentation, which showed a graph of Zephyrian military deployments over the past 3 weeks. Actually, no. My primary evidence is that they've completely restructured their entire governmental approach based on a conversation we had about delivery schedules and resource allocation. I'm sorry, what? They've stopped conquering people and started helping them instead. In 3 weeks, they've received over 800 requests for assistance from civilizations throughout the galaxy. Councilwoman Chen examined her tablet, which presumably contained intelligence reports about recent galactic activity. Mr. Dalton, our monitoring stations have detected unusual fleet movements in multiple sectors. Large numbers of Zephyrian vessels have been observed approaching various systems. That's the assistance program. Instead of showing up with conquest fleets, they're showing up with cargo ships full of agricultural equipment, medical supplies, and engineering resources. And you believe this represents a fundamental change in their imperial policy? Rick clicked to another slide, this one showing before and after comparisons of Zephyrian diplomatic relations. I believe it represents a fundamental change in their understanding of what an empire is for. They used to think empire was about control. Now they think it's about cooperation. Chairman Williams set down his tablet with the careful precision that suggested he was trying very hard to remain patient. Mr. Dalton, Empires don't just change their fundamental nature overnight because of a conversation about delivery schedules. Sir, have you ever tried to explain human logistics principles to someone who spent 4 centuries thinking that conquest is the solution to every problem? No, I have not. It's a pretty eye-opening experience for both parties involved. Councilwoman Singh, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Mr. Dalton, what exactly are the Zephyrians proposing? Rick clicked to his next slide, which showed the comprehensive partnership proposal that had taken the Imperial Advisory Committee an entire week to draft. The Zephyrian Human Cooperative Development Initiative, a formal alliance designed to combine human organizational expertise with Zephyrian resources to address infrastructure and development needs throughout the galaxy. What would this partnership entail? Cultural exchange programs, technological cooperation, joint development projects, and what they're calling collaborative governance consulting. Collaborative governance consulting? They want human advisors to help them figure out how to run a galactic empire without conquering everybody. The council chambers were absolutely quiet for a moment. Rick got the impression that this wasn't the type of diplomatic proposal they'd been expecting. Chairman Williams finally spoke. Mr. Dalton, you're asking the United Earth Council to approve a formal alliance with a species that has spent 4 centuries conquering the galaxy. I'm asking the United Earth Council to approve a formal alliance with a species that has spent 4 centuries learning how to organize galactic-scale resources and is now looking for better ways to use those resources. And you believe they can be trusted? Rick thought about Emperor Vex Thul reviewing efficiency reports, Commander Thex helping Centauri colonists improve their power systems, and an entire empire's worth of military officers discovering that cooperation was more satisfying than conquest. Sir, 3 weeks ago they were ready to execute me for accidental territorial violation. Yesterday they offered to help Earth establish colonies in 12 different star systems and asked if we needed any assistance with our healthcare infrastructure. That's quite a change. They're very efficient people. Once they decide to do something, they do it thoroughly. Councilwoman Chen looked up from her tablet. Mr. Dalton, our xenopsychology consultants have reviewed your reports about Zephyrian culture. They note that you've described a species that appears to be fundamentally driven by organizational efficiency. That's accurate. And you convinced them that cooperation is more efficient than conquest. I didn't have to convince them. I just pointed out some resource allocation issues with their current approach. They figured out the cooperation part on their own. What sort of resource allocation issues? Rick grinned. Well, for starters, conquest is really expensive. You've got to maintain occupation forces, deal with resistance movements, and constantly monitor conquered territories for rebellion attempts. Cooperation costs a lot less because people are generally willing to work with you if you're helping them solve their problems. Chairman Williams was taking notes now, which Rick took as a good sign. And the Zephyrians accepted this analysis? They ran the numbers. Turns out that cooperative civilizations are about 4 times more productive than conquered ones, and they require about 80% less administrative oversight. So their conversion to cooperative principles was based on efficiency calculations? And the fact that their officers are much happier when they're building things instead of conquering them. Apparently, helping people solve infrastructure problems is more intellectually stimulating than filing conquest reports. Councilwoman Singh leaned forward. Mr. Dalton, what do you see as the potential benefits of this alliance for Earth? Rick clicked to his final slide, which showed a comprehensive analysis of potential partnership outcomes. Access to galactic-scale resources, technological exchange with 73 different civilizations, assistance with colony development, and what might be the most extensive interstellar trade network in galactic history. And the potential risks? Well, if it doesn't work out, we're probably no worse off than we were before. But if it does work out, we might accidentally help create the galaxy's first cooperative empire. Accidentally? I seem to have a talent for that. The council members spent several minutes reviewing their tablets and whispering among themselves. Finally, Chairman Williams looked up. Mr. Dalton, the United Earth Council will need to debate this proposal extensively before reaching a decision. However, I think I speak for all of us when I say that your presentation has been illuminating. Thank you, sir. One final question. If we approve this alliance, what role do you see yourself playing in its implementation? Rick thought about the rusty bucket, still parked at Centauri Station, and the cargo runs he'd been missing while inadvertently reshaping galactic civilization. Honestly, sir, I'd like to go back to hauling cargo. But if you need someone to help work out the details of this partnership, I'm willing to help. Even if it means spending more time in Imperial throne rooms instead of cargo ship cockpits? Well, Rick said with a grin, someone's got to make sure they keep their paperwork organized. Epilogue: The Accidental Ambassador, or How One Cargo Run Changed the Galaxy. 1 year after Rick Dalton's accidental encounter with the Zephyrian Empire, the galaxy was a fundamentally different place. The Zephyrian Cooperative Development Authority had grown to include 47 different species, managed infrastructure projects in over 200 star systems, and had somehow made bureaucracy both efficient and interesting, an achievement that philosophers would probably debate for centuries. Rick sat in his usual spot in the Imperial Palace's Efficiency Advisory Committee meeting, drinking coffee that had been perfected by a joint human-Zephyrian culinary development team, and reviewing reports that described the most successful interstellar cooperation program in galactic history. Status report on the Educational Development Initiative, Emperor Vexthal announced, still consulting tablets but now doing so with the satisfied confidence that suggested his organizational systems were finally working the way he'd always hoped they would. Advisor Keth stood up, no longer looking overwhelmed but instead radiating the satisfaction of someone whose job had become significantly more interesting. The Cooperative Educational Authority has received implementation requests from 156 different civilizations. We've successfully established integrated learning centers in 37 star systems, and our cultural exchange programs are operating at 400% above projected capacity. Excellent. Healthcare development? The Galactic Healthcare Cooperative has eliminated medical supply shortages in 12 different sectors, established emergency response protocols that reduce disaster response times by 70%, and developed treatment approaches that work across 23 different species biologies. Rick looked up from his own tablet, which contained shipping schedules for his next cargo run. How are the logistics holding up? All this cooperation has got to be generating some serious supply chain challenges. Actually, another advisor chimed in, the distributed logistics network has been our most successful implementation. Average delivery times are down 45%, resource waste has decreased by 60%, and we've established trade relationships between species that had never even heard of each other before. Emperor Vexthal nodded approvingly. The efficiency gains continue to exceed our projections across all sectors. Human organizational principles appear to scale remarkably well. It's not really the principles, Rick said, finishing his coffee and standing up to refill his cup. It's the people. You guys were already good at organizing things. You just needed permission to organize them in ways that actually helped people. Permission? Well, encouragement. Maybe confidence. You spent 4 centuries building systems designed to control people, so you got really good at control. But people are generally more productive when they're working towards something they care about rather than just following orders. The Emperor was quiet for a moment, considering this. And you believe that people naturally care about helping others? Most people, yeah. Given the choice between making someone's life worse and making someone's life better, most beings will choose to help. You just have to give them the opportunity and the resources to do it effectively, which is why the cooperative approach has been so successful. Exactly. Instead of conquering civilizations and then figuring out how to manage them, you're helping civilizations solve their own problems and then building relationships based on mutual benefit. Advisor Keth pulled up a holographic display showing the current structure of what was now called the Galactic Cooperative Alliance. Captain Dalton, we've grown from 73 controlled systems to 847 cooperative partnerships in just 12 months. At this rate, we'll have peaceful cooperative relationships with every major civilization in the galaxy within 5 years. Rick studied the display, which looked like a 3-dimensional flowchart of interstellar friendship. That's actually incredible. You guys have basically created galactic peace through superior project management. Is that really what we've accomplished? The Emperor asked. Well, when you think about it, most conflicts are really just resource allocation problems or communication failures. Fix the logistics and improve the information flow, and people can usually work things out. You make it sound simple. The principles are simple. The implementation is complicated, but you guys are really good at complicated implementation. Emperor Vexthal stood up from his chair and walked to the conference room's main window, which offered a view of the Imperial capital's skyline. The view had changed significantly over the past year. The imposing military architecture was now interspersed with cultural centers, cooperative research facilities, and what appeared to be the galaxy's largest interspecies university. Human Rick Dalton, the Emperor said. 1 year ago, I ruled an empire built on conquest and maintained through force. Today, I administer a cooperative alliance built on mutual assistance and maintained through voluntary participation. How does that feel? More satisfying than I expected, and significantly more complex than I anticipated. Rick joined the Emperor at the window. Complex how? Conquest is straightforward. You identify a target, deploy appropriate force, and integrate the conquered territory into your administrative systems. Cooperation requires constant negotiation, continuous problem-solving, and what our psychologists describe as unprecedented levels of interpersonal communication. But it's working. It's working better than our most optimistic projections suggested. Our member civilizations are more productive, more innovative, and more stable than any territories we ever controlled through conquest. Rick nodded. Plus, your officers seem happier. Our officers are definitely happier. Apparently, solving infrastructure problems and facilitating interstellar cooperation is more intellectually engaging than filing conquest reports. Makes sense. Building things is more interesting than breaking things. The Emperor was quiet for a moment, watching the activity in the streets below. Human Rick Dalton, I have a confession to make. What's that? When I first ordered your execution, it was because your presence represented a failure in our intelligence systems. We pride ourselves on knowing everything that happens in our territory, and your ship appeared without any advance warning. I was just lost. Yes, but that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was that you seemed completely unconcerned about the situation. You treated potential execution as if it were a scheduling conflict. Rick grinned. It was a scheduling conflict. That's exactly what I mean. Your reaction suggested that either you were remarkably confident in your ability to survive the encounter, or you had such complete faith in the reasonableness of other beings that you assumed we would eventually work something out. I guess it was the second one. In 4 centuries of imperial expansion, no one had ever assumed that we were reasonable. They feared us, fought us, attempted to negotiate with us, or tried to hide from us. But no one ever just trusted us to do the right thing. Rick considered this. Did that bother you? It bothered me more than I realized at the time. I had spent centuries building an empire that was feared and respected, but I had never built anything that was trusted. And now you have. And now we have. The Galactic Cooperative Alliance is built on trust, maintained through reliability, and expanded through reputation. It's a completely different approach to galactic governance. Do you miss the old approach? The Emperor looked out at the bustling activity below, beings from dozens of different species working together on projects that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. I miss the simplicity of conquest. I don't miss the isolation of ruling through fear. Rick finished his coffee and checked his chronometer. Speaking of schedules, I've got a cargo run to make. Medical supplies for the new Arcturian colony, plus some educational materials for their cultural exchange program. Still hauling cargo? Someone's got to keep the supply lines running. Besides, I like the work. It's honest, it helps people, and it gives me an excuse to travel around the galaxy and see how all these cooperative projects are working out. Emperor Vexthal smiled, an expression that would have been unthinkable in the old imperial court. Human Rick Dalton, you have fundamentally altered the course of galactic civilization, revolutionized our understanding of effective governance, and created the most successful interstellar cooperation program in recorded history. I delivered some medical supplies and made some suggestions about resource allocation. You showed us that there were alternatives to conquest that we had never considered, approaches to organization that were both more effective and more satisfying than anything we had previously attempted. Rick headed toward the door, then paused and turned back. Your Magnificence, can I ask you something? Of course. What are you going to do when you run out of problems to solve? The Emperor considered this question with the serious attention he once reserved for military strategy. Find more problems to solve, I suppose. The galaxy is a large and complex place. I suspect we'll have plenty of opportunities for cooperative problem-solving. And if you run out of galaxy, then I suppose we'll have to start looking at other galaxies. Rick grinned. Just remember to ask before you show up with a fleet. Other galaxies might not be as understanding as I was. We'll send cargo haulers first. Good plan. As Rick made his way back to the rusty bucket, he reflected on the strange series of events that had brought him to this point. A year ago, he'd been a simple cargo hauler trying to make a living in an increasingly complex galaxy. Now he was somehow the unofficial ambassador between humanity and the most powerful cooperative alliance in galactic history. The rusty bucket looked exactly the same as it had a year ago, maybe a little more worn, definitely no more stylish, but still reliable in the way that really mattered. Rick ran through his pre-flight checklist with the familiar satisfaction of someone who knew his equipment and trusted his procedures. Computer, plot a course for the Arcturian system. And let's try to avoid accidentally discovering any new empires along the way. Course plotted, Captain. Although I should point out that our current trajectory will take us through several systems where cooperative alliance development projects are underway. That's fine. We might learn something. Captain? Yeah? Do you ever regret getting lost that day? Rick thought about this as he guided the rusty bucket away from the Imperial capital, past construction sites and shipping lanes that bustled with the activity of dozens of species working together toward common goals. No, he said finally. Getting lost led us to some pretty interesting places, and helped reshape galactic civilization. That too. Although I still think that was mostly an accident. A happy accident. The best kind. As the rusty bucket entered hyperspace, Rick settled back in his pilot's chair with the satisfaction of someone whose work was both important and personally fulfilling. He had medical supplies to deliver, new colonies to support, and an entire galaxy of cooperative projects to visit. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was definitely the life he'd chosen. And in a galaxy where former conquest fleets were now delivering agricultural equipment and military officers were helping plan cultural exchange programs, Rick Dalton continued to do what he'd always done: haul cargo, help people, and occasionally make suggestions about resource allocation that somehow ended up changing everything. The galaxy was a better place than it had been a year ago, and Rick was pretty sure it was going to keep getting better. After all, people were generally reasonable once you gave them a chance. Problems usually had solutions if you approached them creatively, and sometimes the best way to change the universe was just to show up and be helpful, even if you arrived completely by accident. The end.